Hi, I'm Francesc and this is Just for Funk. So how do we listen to the phone call with Twilio? So if we go back to the documentation, there's a record that sounds pretty good. The record verbs records the caller's voice and returns to you the URL of a file containing the audio recording. You can optionally generate text transcriptions or recorded calls by setting transcribe attribute of the record verb to true. And that is cool, but I'm not going to be using it because I want to be able to have extra security. So what I want to be able to do is to force people to say passwords that might be in different languages. Imagine if you had to say something like set just into chat, mention fecha d'un penjat, which is totally correct Catalan. That could be an extra security measure. Even if you heard what I just said, you're going to be able to repeat it. Security. So, okay, so let's do that. Let's record the audio and see what happens. To be able to have a faster deployment cycle, right now, deploying takes some time. It takes a couple seconds, but it takes a little bit, right? While Go Observe, it just, every single time I change a file, it will just recompile the server and have the new version running, which is what I would like to have. But Twilio cannot get to my localhost 8080, right? Well, it can. There's this really cool thing that you should definitely check it out. It's called Ngrok, and it is also written in Go, so it is a very cool tool. And when you do Ngrok HTTP 8080. And now this URL here is actually pointing to my Ngrok 8080, which is kind of perfect because that means that I can change my URL for a little bit and say that that's going to be Ngrok 8080, my port 8080. And now if I change this file to say, hello Gopher, how are you? Just by saving, I don't have to redeploy anything. If I call again, we should get that new message.
Hello Gopher, how are you?
Great. So yeah, Ngrok's gonna make our lives easier, especially when we're developing with webhooks that need a URL, but that URL needs to point to our machine. So perfect. Okay, so far what we got is our application running directly on our machine and Twilio redirecting the phone calls to Ngrok that will redirect it to our machine. So any changes we do locally will be automatically visible by using my phone and calling the number, which is great. So now what I'm gonna try is we're gonna use the record verb that we said before we could use. So let's see the documentation again. So let's see the example. It says record timeout 10, transcribe true. So what I'm gonna do is record timeout 5. I'm gonna replace this, we'll move it later back in. I'm gonna say I wanna record 5 seconds. And not transcribe, and we can write this as closing element right there. Cool. So now if I call the phone, we should be able to leave a message and get something. So let's see.
Hello Gopher, how are you?
Hello, doing well, and you? Normally that's gonna wait for 5 more seconds.
Hello Gopher, how are you?
Okay, so what happened there is that we actually got another call back to the same application, right? How do we know if there's a recording or not? Let's see, documentation, back to documentation. Recording URLs. Okay, so recording URL will be a parameter. We're going to log, actually going to dump the request completely. So cputil dump request, and I want to dump the body. Do I want to dump the body? Yeah, sure, why not? And next, that's going to give me some bytes and an error. I'm gonna ignore the error. Don't ignore the errors in general, but here I don't think it's that dangerous. I'm gonna create a new context on App Engine. which we need to be able to, whoop, log info into the context, and we're gonna say request is this. Will that work? Be declared and use. Okay, cool. So we're gonna be logging the whole request with the body included. So we'll be able to see if there's a difference between the first request that says hello Gopher and the second one after we say something.
Hello, Gopher. How are you?
I'm great, thank you very much.
Hello, Gopher. How are you?
Okay, so as you can see, there's actually a couple things here going on. The first request is this one here. And we got cold and color country and state. And so this logs a lot of information. It's a little bit too much for me. So rather than doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to access directly the form values. Going to do r.parseForm. And that returns an error. If that fails, I'm gonna say that there's a bad request because we're not able to parse the form, so there's something wrong with it. So just ignore it. Otherwise, what we're gonna do is we're going to iterate over the keys and values in the post form and range, and we're gonna print key value for key and value. And actually we're gonna need the context here. Cool, so that's going to allow us to parse the form and then print all the things. Let's try. Hello, I'm doing great, thank you. Cool, so interesting. So we have a lot of information here. The interesting thing is that on the second time, we have recording URL, which contains this file here. And if we download that file. Hello, I'm doing great, thank you. Great, so that is actually the content of the files that I had. So what if now I used play on that URL? Okay, so now we know which parameter we want. We want recording URL. So if the recording URL is the value in the form for this field, recording URL. So if recording is empty, then we're just gonna print what we were printing before, the content, and just leave. That is the first time, basically. If not, that is the second time, and that recording URL should say something, right? Okay, so I'm gonna have a welcome message. So if there's no recording URL, we say the welcome message, and otherwise we're gonna have a echo message, which is going to be pretty much the same content. The only difference is that instead of record, we're gonna have play. We're not gonna say anything, we're just gonna play. And I will have %s here that I will replace. So I will do fprintf into the output, echo message, and I'm gonna replace that %s with the recording URL. Okay, so now the first time We will say welcome message. We will print the welcome message that says hello gopher, how are you? Record for 5 seconds. Then the second time we will actually receive a recording URL. We'll say something and we will just play that and stop the call. Let's try that.
Hello, Gopher. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you very much.
I am doing great. Thank you very much.
Perfect. And call ended. Nice. So we're very close. So we know that that recording URL is actually what we want to use. But now what we want to do is we want to send that recording URL to the Google Speech API. How do we do that? Well, let's see the docs. Okay, so let's go to cloud.google.com/speech. That might be the speech API. Yes, it is. Perfect. So let's see the documentation. And the documentation for the API has 2 different APIs. There's REST API, a gRPC API. And I might do an episode on gRPC at some point, but just to keep things simple, we're going to use REST API today. So the REST API, there's a bunch of operations. There's sync recognize and async recognize. What we want to do is really synchronous. We receive a file and we just record, like we want the result of that, and that's it. So everything we need to do is send a post object to this URL. Cool, easy. What is the content? Well, the content will have to have two fields, a config and an audio, and then a config has a bunch of things inside. We're gonna see that in a minute. I'm gonna use, I don't know if you've ever seen this application, but I really like it. It is called Postman, and it is very cool. Okay, so what it allows you to do is you can send post requests to stuff. Okay, it says, oh yeah, you cannot use it. You need a valid API key. That is true. We actually need to use the API. We need first an API key. So let's create it. I'm gonna go to my console here, and on API Manager, we can search for an API, Speech API, Google Cloud Speech API. Enable it. This flow is actually pretty nice. I really like that. Basically, just click 3 buttons and then you're done. What we're gonna have is a web server, pretty much. And I don't know the IP key, so I'm just gonna go with that one. Cool, we got an API key. Easy, right? And we need to use it somehow. Key equals that API key. Okay, so now it's complaining about the fact that we're missing fields, which is fine. Google API Explorer, which is very useful. It allows you to basically try out different APIs directly from the browser. So let's search for speech. Google Cloud Speech API, sync recognize. Sure, authorize and execute, loud. Okay. So since we're already here, why don't we use this one? Okay, so config has a bunch of fields. Some of them are compulsory, some of them are not. So recognition config has encoding, sample rate, language code, max alternatives. Encoding is required. So I'm gonna try MP3. Encoding is MP3. The sample rate is also required. And I'm actually not sure what is the sample rate. So let me see if this tells me. Yeah, there you go, 8,000. So sample rate is 8,000. All the other are optional, so that is cool. And then the audio object, we're gonna also create it here, audio, and we have content or URI. URI is something on Google Cloud Storage, and we could do that. We could download the file from the Twilio URL to the Google Cloud Storage, store it there, and then use the URI from Google Cloud Storage to send it to the API. But I feel like that's a little bit overwhelming to me right now, so I'd rather use the base64 representation, which is probably easier. Basically, we're just gonna get the whole file, encode it to base64, and put it there inside the JSON, which makes a big JSON file. But I think we should be fine. So let's try that. We're gonna say that content is, can I do base64 of recording on MP3? And I'm gonna put that in there. Okay, execute. And MP3 is not correct. Let's go to the config again. Format, audio encoding. Oh, there's one more. Okay, so audio. Oh, it's actually one more field. So it is. Oh, so these are the options. Yeah, linear 16. That's the one we have, I think. Say this linear 16. Execute again. And we got, nice. So we got a 200 response and it says, I'm doing great, thanks, which is exactly what we wanted. So now what we want to do is we want to basically generate this JSON file from our application. To do that, there's a couple ways of doing it, but the way I'm gonna do it is, so I'm gonna say transcribe. I'm gonna create a function, transcribe. I'm gonna pass the context, which doesn't exist yet. So append.new context of R, and also the URL, recording, actually we called it. That will give me some text and an error. If the error is not nil, then we're just gonna say, actually, an error saying we could not transcribe. And also we're going to say status internal error. Finally, we're going to log saying could not transcribe. And here I'm gonna give a little bit more information because this is actually something that only I can see. I'm gonna add the error itself, and then I'm gonna return. Okay, so, and if text equals, whoops, if text equals hello gopher, then we let the person come in. So we're gonna print that, else we're gonna print something else. So we're gonna call it like welcome message and bye message. So, and of course we should log. Okay, so welcome message. Oh, welcome message is already that one. Come in message, or come in or go away message. So the come in message is gonna say go away, you evil person. And the, oh no, that is the go away message. That is the go away message gonna say that. And the come in message gonna say welcome home. And then play digits 9 to open the door. Cool, so this should be enough, but we're still missing out. Oh, we don't need this anymore. There's gonna be fprint. Cool. So we're missing just the fact that transcribe is not implemented yet. So we should do that. What is the problem in this one? Undefined status, internal server error. Okay. So we need to define this transcribe function. Okay. So transcribe given a context and a URL, which is a string, will return a string and an error. So what we need to do is we need to first download that URL and then encode it to base64, then send that to the Google Cloud Speech API, and then return the result of doing that. So let's do it. Okay, so first things first, what I want to do is to fetch the recording from that URL. So I'm gonna define one more function. No, not yet. I'm just gonna do it here. So to do a GET request from App Engine, we need to use a URL fetch. URL fetch the client from a context will give us an HTTP client. And then that HTTP client, we can do everything we normally do with any other HTTP client. So we can do client.get of that URL, and that will give us a response and an error. If the error is not nil, then we should return no transcription and could not fetch the URL, and this is the reason, the URL and the reason. Otherwise, also if the response status code is not status okay, we should return also an error saying fetched status fetch with status status, and status code is an integer. Status is the string that contains both the integer like 200 and the English translation like okay. Great. What else? If that is correct and that is correct, then we actually got the contents from the URL, and those are in a body. So I'm gonna do io-util read all that body. So response.body. We need to make sure that we close that that body at the end. Once we're done, that will return some contents and an error. If the error is not nil, it means that we were not able to read the contents. Could not read response, and this is the error. Otherwise, now we have P is the recording. So that is the bytes. And I feel like this should be in a different function. Fetch audio context and URL string, and that's gonna return actually a slice of bytes and an error. So that's gonna do exactly the same as we had before, but nil instead of empty string, and return P and nil. Okay, so this fetch audio, what it does is we give it a context and a URL, goes find it and returns whatever it is. io-util. There you go, that is better. So we have that function that we can go here. Fetch audio of C URL. If the error is the nil, then return empty string and the error. Otherwise, fetch transcription. And the transcription, we're gonna give it again a context because we're gonna go out to get to the Google Cloud Speech API. And we're also going to give it the contents that we want to send. And that will return a string and an error, so we can just return that. Cool, so now let's define that function. Fetch transcription, context.context, and content of bytes, and that will return a string and an error. We want to send basically this JSON file to this URL. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the URL here. So const speech API, speech URL is this thing, and actually speech API key. You know what? What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a variable here, and I'm gonna add one more thing, which is get env of speech API key. Okay, and why do I do this? Well, I do this because that way I can define this here, which I like it better. There you go. I want to make sure that this is actually correct. Google App Engine environment variables. You put them in the app.yaml, and it is inside of defining environment variables. And variables, okay. And variables, and then the name and the value. Cool. No need for that thing there. Okay, so that will allow me to access the environment variable speech API key from my Go code, but that way it's not hard coded in my code, so someone can replace it in the app.yaml if they want to. Cool. So what I need to do is I need to send a post request to this, and the post request should have as the body a JSON object, and the JSON object, we're gonna define it as a new type, speech request, which is gonna be a struct. So it should match what we had here. We have a config, which is something which is a struct. Then actually let me copy paste it, not the content, because the content is pretty big. So basically we want to get config, has encoding, which is a string, and sample rate, which is an int, and then audio, which is a struct that contains content that is a string. Is it a string or bytes? I could say it's a string. Yeah, it is a string, because that is the whole point of base64, basically. Cool. Now, if we encode this, it could get config, encoding, sample rate, etc. All the file names, all the field names could be uppercase. So let's fix that by adding this thing, where we basically say, oh yeah, encode it as config with lowercase instead. Same thing for sample rate. Same thing for encoding. Same thing for content. Same thing for audio. Cool. So we're gonna create a new request, and we're gonna set every field. So request.config.encoding is gonna be linear 16 every time. Config.sample rate is gonna be 8,000. What is this complaining about? Oh, good catch. There you go. And request.audio.content is going to be the base64 encoded version of the bytes we got. And that is actually easy to do. Base64 standard encoding. Encode to string B, if I remember correctly. Yeah, there you go. So now we just encoded that those bytes to base64. Simple, right? And that's it. Now we're able to send that as the request. But before we do that, we need to marshal that value to JSON. So JSON.marshal of the request. And that will return more bytes. So more bytes and an error. We could reuse bytes. Just gonna call it J. If we're not able to encode that, we should return an error. saying could not encode request, and this is the error. Couldn't encode speech. No, could not encode speech request. URL fetch dot client of the context dot post, and the URL is going to be the speech URL. The body type is going to be application JSON, and finally the body is going to be something that's going to allow us to read from that list of bytes, which we can do bytes.new reader of B. And that will return a response and an error. If the error is not nil, we should return an error saying something went wrong. So could not transcribe, and this is the reason. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to decode what we got as a response. So we're gonna do something similar as we did with encoding, but now we know that the response is gonna be something like either like this. So that is gonna be an error case, or we also have the successful case, which is something like this. So we have two different cases. So we're gonna define a new variable, var data, which is of type struct, and it's gonna have both an error, which is a struct with a code that has an int, message that has a string, and status that is also string, and that is exactly this. And we don't need to use the field tags as we did before, because the JSON package will try to decode also the lowercase, so there's no problem with that when we're decoding. And then we also have results, and that is a slice of structs that has alternatives, which is a slice of structs that has transcript, which is a string, and confidence, which is a float 64, we can say. Okay, so now that is the data we're gonna decode. So what we can do is we can create a new decoder, a new JSON decoder that's going to read from the response of body. And remember to close the body at the end as usual. And it's gonna decode into data. If that error is not nil, means that the response we got from the Google Cloud Speech API, we're not able to decode it. And that's an internal error probably, but we can return something saying error F could not decode speech response, and that is the error. Otherwise, if data.error.code is not 0, that means that there's some message to be given. So we can return an error, speech API error. This is going to be the code, this is going to be the message, this is going to be the status. Or the other way around. So data.error.code, data.error.status, data.error.message. And we can probably break the line there to make it look a little bit better. Okay, so that is if we decode, if we're able to decode, but there's an error in the message we decoded. And finally, we're gonna have, so if the line of results of data.results is 0, or the length of data.results of 0 dot alternatives is 0, then no transcriptions found. And otherwise, we'll return data.results of 0 dot, that is results dot alternatives of 0 dot transcript. There you go. And no error. Okay, that's that compile. That looks like compiles. Since we're running on App Engine, there's actually a slightly older version of Go, so that's going to be golang.org/x/ned/context. But for the rest, we should be good. Marshall. Oh, we never used J. Oh, yeah, because we never sent the request. Wait. Oh, J. Woo. You see, sometimes that error is actually useful. Okay, and cool, everything compiles, so I think it's time to try it again. Hello, Gopher.
Welcome home.
Nice. Okay, so that works. And now we're gonna try the other one, which is saying something that is not hello, Gopher.
Hello, Gopher. How are you?
Hello, Pythonista.
Go away, you evil person.
Nice. Cool. So this was a much longer video than I expected. I thought that it could be like 30 minutes or so, but it was much longer. I still need to edit it, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be around 45 to 50 minutes. So if you got down to the end, thank you so much for watching. And let me know if you have any questions, if you have any topics that you'd like me to cover, or if you have any other proposals. Goodbye.